Hi.
Hi, Julie. Hold on for 1 second.
Sure.
So, welcome to the Scale Down live stream.
It's 2 o'clock.
Where we dive into everything about downsizing, aging, and everything in between. I'm your host, Natalie Lewin of Lux Transitions. And each week, we will bring you expert insight, personal stories, and practical advice to help you or a loved one navigate these important life transitions. So today we have a very special guest with us, Dr. Julie Erickson, clinical psychologist specializing in aging and mental health. In today's episode, we'll uncover the story behind Dr. Erickson and her practice, explore some of the challenges and triumphs faced by adults on the aging journey, and gain valuable insights into how her services specifically assist along the way. So, whether you're on this journey yourself or know someone that is, you're in the right place. So, let's dive right in. Thank you, Dr. Erickson. I want to welcome you and thank you for your presence. And before we dive right in, want to know, how are you enjoying the summer? Seems like Mother Nature is a little bit confused, but beautiful nonetheless.
Yes. And first off, thank you for having me. I'm really delighted to be here with you today. And yeah, but also I am here physically, but like mentally, I need to be like in a hammock having a nap by a lake. I feel like I'm just in that state of mind right now,
Right.
but here we are.
Perfect. So, any plans? I know that you were traveling before. How was that? Any other
Good.
plans?
Yeah. No, I told you I went to Scotland, did a week trip to Edinburgh, then up to the Highlands. And if anybody watching hasn't been yet, consider this your sign to go to Scotland. It was absolutely beautiful. And then I've got a trip to Greece coming up in September. So yeah, not too
Beautiful.
shabby. Yeah, I'm not suffering over here. That's for sure.
Definitely not. And good time after all of the crowds leave.
Yeah,
You'll be visiting.
that's right. That's right. I'm excited.
Fabulous. So let's dive into it. I wanted you to start by telling us a bit about your background and what inspired you to focus on issues related to seniors' mental health.
Yeah, so my training is as a clinical psychologist, and I've been in private practice for close to 10 years now, as well as engaged in teaching at the University of Toronto, training psychologists as well. But if we sort of rewind and look back to where this all got started, actually trails back first to my job as a teenager working in a nursing home, believe it or not. So it was one of my first jobs, was working in a nursing home in the recreation department. And at the time, 16-year-old Julie was thinking, wow, this is great. I basically get paid to socialize. This is awesome. But as time went along, I started to develop some close relationships with a lot of the residents there and really got to see various different facets of aging and getting older. And certainly some people who had coped very well and adapted quite nicely to the many different curveballs that aging can throw at people, versus other people had a much more difficult time or were more socially isolated, didn't have very many visitors, or had more major health issues and complications. So you really got to see that stage of life in a very different way.
Yeah.
And as sort of a budding social scientist, I really started to get curious about, well, how do we actually help people age in a way that preserves their quality of life and their dignity and helps them still thrive well into their 80s or 90s? And also what predicts the difficulties that people might have in later life? What are some of the preventative things that we can do to help set people up for aging as successfully as they possibly can? So that ultimately led me to clinical psychology and a career now, which I'm really passionate and excited about, that gets me both doing direct service provision with older adult clients and with adults across the lifespan, but also really training service providers on how to work with older adults better, how to tailor psychological treatments to the needs of older people, and how to train, psychologists up and coming for how to work with older adults and generating some excitement for geriatric mental health.
Oh, that's amazing. And I heard you say 80s, 90s, but these days people are living so much longer. Whereas I remember when I was younger, centurions, that was like there was far and few between. And now you're seeing that number increase. And we know that that space of boomers, that's like the biggest demographic. And we need more people that can help and support and get them through their journey, and not just get them through their journey, but help them to thrive.
Yep, absolutely. I mean, with life expectancy rates being as high as they are at record highs, it does force us to sort of rethink, what does aging look like? What does not only just longevity look like, but what does aging well look like well into your later years?
Yes, exactly. So, I think I'm gonna come to this now. So, what are some of the common emotional and psychological challenges seniors face when moving from their home that they've been in for decades, let's say, and moving into another new living situation?
Yeah. I think there's various different components that can make this a challenge. Sometimes moves are precipitated by a stressor or activating event. So, whether that's the death of the spouse or a significant fall or decline in your functionality or your mobility. And of course, there's a tremendous amount of stress that comes with dealing with that stressful life event, let alone tackling a move and getting your ducks in a row to be able to actually move somewhere else. So there's sort of that piece of it. But then there's also just the tremendous amount of anxiety that can come with making a move. Anxiety tends to be elicited when we're in the face of more perceived uncertainty, right? And what are moves but a giant experience of uncertainty? Where am I going to go? What's that going to be like? Am I going to be happy there? Am I going to make new friends? Will my friends come to visit me? Right? Like there's so much uncertainty that comes with a move that I think can be quite stressful for a lot of people. But I think with moves as well, I mean, it's not uncommon for people to feel down, right? To feel like, especially if there's losses that they're incurring during the move, loss of a neighborhood you're familiar with, loss of space, loss of some of your perhaps autonomy. So there's that piece to deal with as well. It also might, not be uncommon to experience other emotions, whether it's regret or feeling angry or frustrated. So I think the emotional fallout of moves can be quite varied and be quite challenging. And of course, we don't want to neglect the fact that moves can also be exciting, right? There can also be a lot of positive benefits, some relief that comes with shedding, let's say, a larger home you don't need the space for anymore. So the emotional reaction can be quite varied and cut across the spectrum.
I'm glad that you touched upon that. Yeah, I was talking to a client of mine, and we were talking about, the familiarity of the home she's been in for decades, and that almost it's like a trauma, something to cope with trauma, just being in her space that she's familiar with.
Mhm.
That, and she was talking about, her three kids are now nearly all married, have their own lives, and she's thinking, like, what's my role in all of this?
Mhm.
It's like
Mhm.
they're leaving. I felt like I was a great mom, but now they're going on and raising their own families. And she said, that the house, it's a coping mechanism.
Mhm. Yep.
And I never thought about it like that that it's a coping mechanism. So I'm glad you touched upon that. Okay, so let me ask you this. How important is it for seniors to maintain a sense of routine when they do move into a new space?
Yeah, it's a good question, and you sort of touched on the sort of familiarity piece in your reflection about your one, client there. And I think we all need some semblance of routine, stability, and familiarity, no matter where we are. Our brains really dislike uncertainty, right? We sometimes can treat the uncertain and the unfamiliar as something that's sort of anxiety provoking or a bit scary or nerve wracking. And
Right.
so, and as people tend to get older, and part of this just comes with realizing that there's less time remaining in life, people start to make different choices where they're going to gravitate more towards the familiar, right? The things,
Right.
places, activities that they know and that they love that feel good for them, as opposed to branching out and trying something totally new, totally outside the box, totally different. So, yeah, in terms of routines and familiarity, that's probably a need that either remains the same or increases for older adults, particularly when they're going through a major transition like moving somewhere.
Okay, perfect. So, how important is it for seniors? Oh, I'm sorry. I asked you that already. Can you discuss the potential stressors related to downsizing and how they might affect a senior's mental health?
Yeah. So there's a number of them, as I'm sure you and many people can attest to, right? There's the stressors that come on a sort of practical level, right? Of how is it that I'm going to get rid and part with some of my belongings or things, especially belongings that you've had for a long time or space that you've shared for a long time. So that aspect can be particularly stressful, the sort of practical aspect. But I
Right.
think there's also the shift that happens in terms of even your identity that might be wrapped up in a space, right? Memories that might be wrapped up in a space. And letting go of some of those things can represent a loss for people. As much as they might be excited to transition into something smaller and to do something a little bit different. But if you're downsizing, this can also really feel like a loss of a different sort that requires grieving, maybe grieving in a different way than the loss of a person might, but nonetheless, it can still be a loss to process at the same time. So there also might come different types of challenges and stressors with downsizing. There might be, again, sort of the uncertainty piece around like, where am I going now? What's this all going to look like? How am I going to feel when I get there? Is this actually going to be a good fit for me? There's all these both answerable and unanswerable questions that people are sort of wrestling with as they're downsizing. Of course, there's also could be relational stressors as well, right? If you've got family who's really pushing, right, for the downsizing, that has the potential to create some conflict. We've got one member of a spouse who's really enthusiastic about downsizing, but the other isn't. That can, of course, cause some tension and stress as well. So there's a
Right.
number of different aspects in which downsizing can be both stressful, but still a net positive for people.
Right. Okay. Um, what are some of the strategies you recommend for seniors to cope with the anxiety and stress of moving?
Yeah, so one, I think, really good framework to use, and this comes from, a therapy that I practice within cognitive behavioral therapy, which is sort of a leading evidence-based psychological treatment. And it involves taking a look at whether your worries are productive worries or unproductive worries.
Mhm.
So many of us will have plenty of worries that are actually quite helpful and productive. So if we're worrying about things that are actually happening, where there's an action step that we can take to address the problem, and if we're worrying about a question that has an answer. So, for example, how am I going to be able to still play the piano when I move into my new condo? Right? That would be productive worry, right? Because it's about something that's actually happening, a move that's coming up. There's something, theoretically that you can do to take care of this worry, and it's a question with an answer. Right? So that's an excellent worry to actually focus on, right? And take steps to try to solve. However, unproductive worries is when we tend to be worrying about the hypotheticals, the things we're not totally sure are going to just happen yet. And the things that there may not be an obvious action step that we can take now or sometime soon about them. And likewise, they tend to be about unanswerable questions, right? So, am I going to make new friends when I move into my new condo building? Is anybody going to come visit me when I make the
Right.
move? Right? Those are all kind of hypotheticals, questions we can't answer, nor is there anything you can do about them now or sometime soon. So those would be the types of worries that you both want to identify as being unproductive and try as best you can anyways to start to let some of those worries go and focus your attention back in on the productive worries instead. And so sometimes just being able to look at your worries in this different way and focus on taking action for the productive worries can be more empowering and definitely set an older adult up to cope with some of the stressors of moving a little bit better.
So I think that advice can be given and taken from so many of us. I definitely know for me, I have to remind myself, like, why are you worrying about this? You don't know. And let's think about things that I have more control of and that I can answer.
Mm.
And it's funny though that, it's I think that this advice, like, you're a geriatric clinical psychologist, but it's such practical advice for just the whole lifespan.
Yes, of course it is, right? And I mean, that's the beauty of a therapy like cognitive behavioral therapy. It's got pretty broad applicability, right? Many of these strategies will be just as helpful and relevant across the lifespan, whether you're an older adult who's making a move or a younger adult who's heading off to college.
Right. Okay. Perfect. So, can you discuss the potential stressors? Hmm. This kind of it ties in with the last question, but can you discuss a little bit more in depth the potential stressors related to downsizing and how they might affect a senior's mental health?
Yeah. So, like I maybe alluded to in your previous question, I mean, these stressors can come on a practical level.
Right.
So, in terms of getting the help that you need to both make the move, get rid of your belongings, processing the emotions that might come with getting rid of some of your belongings, I think some of that stuff has certainly the potential to activate stress and anxiety for older adults, especially older adults who maybe are more isolated or don't have as much social support to help with the more practical aspects of moving. But I think in terms of other stressors outside of that, so certainly moving from one place to another and downsizing can mean you've got to process and come to terms with different types of losses, right? Especially depending on what is precipitating or activating the move, right? If what's precipitating the move is a decline in your functionality or your mobility or your independence, you're not only losing a home, but you're coming to terms with being not as capable or independent as you once were. So that's challenging. I think there can be, low mood that can come as a result of that, feeling a bit more down in the dumps. So I would expect that could be a stressor. And, I also highlighted the relational aspect of this, right? People don't exist in a vacuum, they exist within a system.
Right.
And when change happens to one person in the system, it also happens to other people in the system as well. It both indirectly and directly impacts them, right? So if someone is making a move, right, and a spouse isn't on board with that, then that's going to cause stress within their relational system. Or if, grandpa or grandma is making a move to, a smaller space, but that's further away from the kids and grandkids, of course, that's going to stress the system as well in a different way. So there can be lots of domino effects, right, both for the older adult making the move, but people within their social systems as well. So the stressors occur in a variety of different ways.
So, would you say that many people are opened and very willing to identify that they may be feeling these stressors? Are they easily identifiable, or what would you say would be some key warning signs to look for to know that somebody may be feeling or going through these stressors that they haven't quite identified yet?
Well, if we kind of first pause and zoom out a little bit just at the landscape of just looking at aging and mental health, right? And recognition of signs and symptoms of, let's say, anxiety or depression or general stress. We know that older adults tend to have lower rates of what we call mental health literacy. So, older adults tend to be less attuned or aware to, let's say, a symptom that they might be having being one of depression. So they're less likely to sort of put a label on it like that. And unfortunately, more likely to label what they're experiencing as sort of normal aging, which, of course, depression and anxiety isn't a part of normal aging. It doesn't have to be just part of getting older. So older adults tend to struggle in terms of the recognizing of some of the symptoms of a mental health condition. They're actually less likely to seek help than other age groups. So there can sometimes be a real barrier here, right? In older adults, both recognizing that what they're experiencing isn't a normal part of aging, but also knowing where and how to get help from a mental health care provider or another healthcare provider. So I think this means we also just need to do a better job at getting education out to different older adults to help them become more aware, right? That
Right.
stress, particularly if it's in and around a major life change, is something important to attune to and pay attention to how you're coping with it. And if you feel like you're having a difficult time, not just to chalk that up to a normal part of aging, but to consider getting connected up to someone who might be able to help you figure out, right, how you're coping, if there's some strategies you can learn to help you cope better, or what other supports you might need.
Fabulous. So why do you think that it is that they're the demographic that is least likely to speak up and seek help?
So there's been some research on this, and interestingly, it's if we look at sort of attitudes towards seeking help, because some people might say, well, maybe older adults just, aren't quite open or receptive to seeking help. But actually, attitudes towards seeking mental health services are actually more positive than younger adults in younger cohorts. So they're
Oh,
actually open to it. In fact, they might be more open to seeking psychological treatment relative to adding another medication to their pill organizer, right? So it's not necessarily a negative attitude piece,
okay.
but it's probably more not having access either to qualified geriatric mental health care professionals or just not having the knowledge to be able to say, oops, what I'm feeling really seems like it's not me. And so, I need to get connected up to someone who might be able to help me assess what's going on and point me in the right direction. So it's probably just lack of access to information and lack of access to qualified healthcare professionals that maybe in part explains the gap in treatment seeking.
Okay. Perfect. So, question for you. What has been the most rewarding aspect of working with older adults?
Oh,
Putting you
I'd say
on here.
Yeah, well, I'd say there are many. I think one of the things I love hearing the most, although it's sort of bittersweet to hear this sometimes, is a client, ending treatment and saying, this was wonderful. This was really helpful for me. I wish I would have had this information 20 or 30 years ago,
Mhm.
right? So it's both wonderful to hear like an older adult is benefiting from treatment, particularly if it's their first time seeing a psychologist in their life. Like I've had clients in their 80s and it's their first time coming to see a psychologist, which is tremendous and reflects their openness and willingness to do something different. So it's wonderful to make an impact in that way. And at the same time, bittersweet, because of course, many of them realizing and wishing that they would have had this information or type of support 20 or 30 years ago. But nonetheless, great that they have it now and are able to make the changes that they can at this stage in their life.
So, do you see that trend changing, that as a demographic gets older, that more people are being open to seeking help? Because I think that's actually probably a generational thing, if you will, because counseling has gained more popularity, I think, within maybe the last 10 to 15 years.
Absolutely.
And okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Like if we look at, particularly in the age of social media, when people have so much access to mental health information, maybe
Right.
not all of which is high quality information and not all of which is maybe used responsibly, but people are just much more literate in terms of mental health speak, therapy speak. And so I think that that helps reduce stigma. And I mean, it's quite common for people to be in therapy these days. People talk about it much more openly. So I do anticipate that as younger cohorts, both millennials and Gen Zers age, that we'll start to see the trends shift a bit and the discrepancies in help seeking start to change.
Okay. Perfect. So what are some of the misconceptions about seniors' ability to adapt to new living situations?
Yeah. Well, I think this question maybe, is a good opportunity to raise our awareness of a number of different ageist stereotypes that can creep into both our assumptions and predictions about how an older adult might cope with relocating or living in a new environment. So we tend to assume that older adults are more stubborn or resistant to change, right, than younger adults are. This is a pervasive, stereotype I think many of us have that might color our expectations for an older adult relocating. It's important to know that there's absolutely no literature or research supporting that this is the case. So, for example, if we look at older adults who are engaged in psychotherapy, they respond just as well to our evidence based treatments as younger adults do. Right. So, suggesting that there's not a whole lot of literature to support that older adults are somehow less capable of changing or more stubborn or resistant. It remains, a stereotype, for that reason. So that's one piece to be aware of. We might also assume that older adults, there's the narrative that aging is about losses, that older adults are depressed and lonely, who, can't take steps to help themselves feel better, maybe after a major transition like this. And again, the research just doesn't suggest this is the case. In fact, most mental health conditions decrease in later life. So we see a decrease in the prevalence of anxiety and depression as people get older. People in general tend to get happier as they age, which might actually be a real benefit in how they're adjusting and adapting to a new living environment. So I think it's important to kind of highlight how some of these sort of culturally ingrained and accepted ideas about getting older, when we actually look at research evidence, don't actually hold up.
Okay. It goes back to never assume.
Yeah, hold your assumptions very lightly.
Yes. Yes. So I have a story about that today. So I'm a door knocker. I still love door knocking. There's a lady that I saw again, and we got into a conversation. She's like, "We're never moving, and I'm leaving here in a box." And she was very, maybe a little standoffish at the beginning, but then we got to speaking, and my assumption probably was like, you just don't want to change.
Mhm.
And but we got speaking, and it came out that, what, the options to move to are not what she wants. And
Mhm.
for that reason, that's why she's staying. And, I've heard that reason, and I know that reason firsthand about the lack of options.
Mhm. Mhm.
And so it also reminded me, is like, hold your assumptions very lightly.
Mhm.
Always be asking questions to understand.
Yes, exactly right. It's so easy to sort of personalize or make this about someone being resistant or stubborn to change, but it
Right.
actually is a decision that's really grounded in reality, right? The perception of available alternatives guides so many of our decisions on a day-to-day basis. And of course, it would guide decisions about where you're living. The
Yeah.
perception that nowhere else is actually going to be better suited for me, well, makes complete sense to stay exactly where you are.
Exactly. Exactly. So there's one thing, and I think it's very special that I left it to the last. And I think we touched on it, but you didn't touch on it. What are what are some of your resources that the audience or any other older adult may have or may use that can help them on this journey?
Yes. So I have a book that came out last fall. I have a copy of the book here. You may or may not be able to see it. There we go. So the book is called The Aging Well Workbook for Anxiety and Depression. So this was really designed to be a great evidence-based self-help resource for older adults who are trying to deal with various different challenges of aging, which could include relocating. It was really inspired by the fact that, my own clinical practice, I was looking to try to refer resources to clients. I wasn't coming up with a whole lot that was really tailored to the unique needs of older adults in later life. So I sat back and thought, well, wait a minute. Like, so if there's nothing else out there, like, could I write this? Like, could I write this book? And yeah, I was like, yeah, why not? Like, let's do this. Let's go for it. So with my colleague Neil Rector, we wrote the book and are really excited just to have a resource to give clients now that includes lots of good stuff from cognitive behavioral therapy. So it's an evidence-based resource. And it's basically kind of like having a psychologist at your fingertips, right? So it's a lot of the work in the book is things that I cover with my clients in therapy, but it's much more accessible. If you don't have access to a psychologist, don't feel comfortable going for whatever reason, the book is a great way to start to familiarize yourself with lots of handy tips and tricks from cognitive behavioral therapy.
Okay, perfect. So, before we get there, we like to do rapid fire questions. And here we go. What's your favorite way to unwind after a long day?
Ooh, it's probably a tie. Watching trashy reality TV shows is a great way to turn my brain off. I absolutely love it. It's not a guilty pleasure. It's just a pleasure.
Right.
Probably in second place, I have a great dance class that I go to. It's a free movement dance class. There's a different DJ every week. It's a great space just to move your body however you want. And it's one of my other favorite ways to unwind.
So you said trashy reality TV.
Yes.
What's your go-to?
Oh my gosh, Summer House, any of the Bravo shows, like they're all the Real Housewives franchises. I am like a diehard fan.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay. So if you could travel anywhere in the world right now, not Scotland or Greece, where would you go?
I might want to go somewhere like Fiji, like go super far, make the trek out there, explore some of the islands there, which feel very remote and far away, which is why it's, I guess, a kind of a fantasy for me. But yeah, being on a boat in the middle of the ocean near Fiji sounds fantastic to me.
Okay. So, what's your go-to comfort food?
Oh, go-to comfort food. I would have to say pizza. Like the bigger, the better. The cheesier, the better. There's a place in Toronto called Maker Pizza, and it always takes a while to get your pizza, but I promise you it's worth the wait. If anybody here on the call is in Toronto or will be in Toronto, Maker Pizza, Frank's Best is the type to get. So I swear by it. It's my favorite comfort food by far.
Oh, I second Maker Pizza.
Yeah.
Oh, it is absolutely delicious. We have to talk about offline a few other great pizza spots in the city, small pizza spots that make amazing pizza. I'm always looking for them.
That sounds great.
Okay, lastly, what's a book or movie you've recently enjoyed, but you've enjoyed many times over?
Well, I will say probably my comfort watch, and this is going to sound bizarre to say that it's a comfort watch, but I probably rewatch The Sopranos every 2 to 3 years.
Okay.
Yeah, why would violence be comforting to me? I don't know. But the characters, the story, And as you rewatch something multiple times, it almost feels like you have a relationship with the characters in the show. So there's just something so oddly comforting about all of these characters that I've seen time and time again.
Got it.
And of course, the portrayal of Dr. Melfi, the psychiatrist in the show, is also interesting.
Right.
I always pay attention to how mental health professionals are depicted in these shows, and I think she's a particularly interesting depiction.
Right.
So, yeah.
Well, thank you for that. So, how can our audience stay updated with your work and get in touch with you if they needed to?
Yeah, so probably the best way is just to contact me through my website, which is drjulieerickson.com. Just note the spelling of my last name, Erickson. There's too many ways to spell Erickson, but this is the one. So either through my website or through LinkedIn, just look me up, Julie Erickson, and I'd be happy to chat more with you, talk about the book, or answer any other questions you have.
Fabulous. Dr. Erickson, thank you so much. You were a wealth of knowledge, and we appreciate your time on our live stream.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
So thank you, everybody, for joining us today. As you know, I'm Natalie Lewin of Lux Transitions, a realtor with Keller Williams Portfolio. I specialize in helping older adults, 65 plus, transition, downsize, right size to their next chapter. I'm passionate about assisting and educating people on this important journey. If you or someone you know is considering a transition, please DM me to schedule a discovery call. Remember, life is beautiful, and I'm here to help you make the most of it. Tune in next week, same time, same place. We'll be speaking with Andrea Allen of the University of Toronto about elder abuse and its many forms. Take care until next time.